Hi, everybody. Welcome to the January 29th, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the Denver Broncos heading to their 8th Super Bowl after a pretty surprising win over the New England Patriots last weekend. Patty Calhoun from Westward, it sounds like pretty much a storybook, a potential storybook ending for Peyton Manning, following the footsteps of his current boss, John Elway. What do you think?
I keep thinking of that Walt Disney movie that scared me to death when I was a little kid, where there's like a panther jumping on the back of a horse. Do you remember that scary, scary Disney thing? I'll find it. Maybe it is. But anyway, I just kind of feel we might see that next Sunday. I'm a horrible predictor on politics, and I'm worse on sports. So all I'm going to say is we are going to see a lot of goofy behavior in this city over the next week, and then probably some goofy behavior on the field, too.
Goofy behavior, indeed. And speaking of goofy behavior, we have David Kopel back. David Kopel from DU Law School and Independence Institute. A big national spotlight on Denver, whether we like it or not, because of the Super Bowl. Is it a good thing?
It's a wonderful thing, and it was a great season, and the Broncos won with a complete team effort in that game and throughout the season, and sort of set an example of good character in that way. And you got to give a kudos to Wade Phillips, the defensive coordinator, a former Broncos head coach and a assistant coach in lots of NFL teams, did an outstanding job this year.
Penfield Take, attorney with QTech Rock. It looks like this is the season now for a lot of those silly bets between Charlotte and Denver and things like that, although the rest of the nation doesn't give us Colorado a whole lot of odds. Or are you expecting the predictable bets from random politicians in each city?
Well, first I have to take issue with your saying this was a surprise victory last week. It was almost a fait accompli. They won the first one with their backup quarterback. Who could question whether they'd win this rematch? Having said that, of course there will be. I can remember back when I was in the legislature, we had a bet with the Georgia General Assembly, and when the Broncos won that Super Bowl over the Falcons, the Georgia Assembly had to wear the horse hats and do a video and sing a song and congratulate the Colorado General Assembly. So yeah, there'll be bets of bison meat and a bunch of other stuff taking place, and it's appropriate. It's good, clean fun, so people ought to have fun doing it.
And Mike Ciccone from the Keystone Policy Center, wrap it up for us.
Regardless of what happens next week, you cannot deny that we've had an incredible ride the past 4 seasons with Peyton Manning. I know a lot of folks, including some people I'm related to, feel like the Panthers are going to steamroll the Broncos, but 4 conference championships, 2 AFC championships. Think of how many teams out there, including the team I grew up rooting for, the Cleveland Browns, would kill for just one of those seasons.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, especially about Cleveland. I'm so sorry. Let's get to the show. Black Lives Matter 5280-ish used a flash mob and songs to disrupt a city council meeting on Monday, attempting to keep the spotlight on Michael Marshall's death. The protest came as the council reviewed and eventually approved a new social impact bond program to help house 250 chronically homeless individuals here in Denver. Patty, this was among many headlines around City Hall. We could have had a topic 2 minutes long between you had the protest, you had this homeless program passing, you had a restructure of the Sheriff's Department. Take your pick. It was a big week. Well,
just as we have so many topics to talk about, Black Lives Matter 5280 has maybe a few too many causes on their plate right now. You know, they really came into prominence this summer and fall when they were pushing to rename Stapleton, because Benjamin Stapleton was a KKK supporter back in the 20s. So you can understand that it didn't go very far. Now they have more campaigns, and especially with Marshall's death. So it's interesting that they were there protesting when the homeless vote was going on. And this is just one of many prongs of Denver's homeless mission. This is not the biggest one. We really have to see where Denver's road home has gone over the last 10 years. We still have all the homeless on the streets. We still have the move with the urban camping ban, which Black Lives Matter is also trying to overturn. But what they should probably be focusing on right now is what's going on at the Sheriff's Department. That's in the jails are where we've seen those high-profile deaths. Marvin Booker, Marshall, It looks like an interesting plan that Patrick Furman is pushing. It certainly makes some sense given what the studies we've seen have come through, that there should be one person really in charge of both these jails, then people in the jails also overseeing them, but that there's going to be a more coordinated look at both the training, how prisoners are handled, and just information about the prisoners. When you see how little information they were giving people when they were deciding where to house prisoners, you can see where a lot of these problems came from.
David, legally, does Mitch Morrissey, I guess my question would be, does he have any more options, or is there potential reforms there? Because I think a lot of people start their beef with the DA's office is that he has a perfect record so far in not issuing any charges to a variety of situations that have ended up with multi-million-dollar settlements. It's not just it's just gone away. It's, at least in a civil case, which I know is a much different threshold, has come back in a different way. Do you expect any changes or comments at this point from the DA's office?
No, Mitch Morrissey has a well-established track record. In his defense, I'd say there's a difference between what you can get in a civil settlement, which is based on the parties predicting which side is going to win 51-49, versus the burden of proof that you have to have as a prosecutor to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And part of that proof is you can win a civil case on just negligence or poor training. That's very different from proving an intentional criminal homicide. He hasn't been a leader. I don't know every single case, but I think the vast majority of ones, he made the correct decision that there was not a prosecutable case there against the police or sheriff's deputies. All lives matter, including the lives of homeless people. So it was particularly selfish and narcissistic of Black Lives Matter to disrupt this particular city council meeting, where we're actually seeing something very innovative and constructive, for which I think the mayor deserves tremendous credit. This social bonds program essentially says we will pay people who try to help homeless people get off the streets, get their lives back together, and become responsibly self-supporting again, based on your success rate. The more you succeed, the more money you make. The less you succeed, the less money you make. So what a efficient way to spend taxpayer dollars on something really important. And the lives of homeless people matter just as much as the lives of anyone else.
Penn, there are a lot of issues here that we talked about, but one thing that keeps coming into my focus is, at some point, does Mayor Michael Hancock need to address specifically the Black Lives 5280? I don't think Black Lives Matter 5280, pardon me, that they're not going away anytime soon, and we're about to get into a summer where we're likely going to have more, at least, opportunities for situations like this. What do you think?
Yeah, and you started out correctly. This is a huge area, so I guess I'd offer the following. Black Lives Matter 5280 has a lot on their plate because you got Marvin Booker and Michael Marshall and a whole bunch of other incidents of excessive force and use of deadly force and loss of life. And we've talked before about all of the settlements and payouts the city's made over the last 3 or 4 years to a number of families because of all of people killed by police or sheriff conduct and or misconduct. It's interesting at the Parade this year, people don't talk about the fact that Black Lives Matter 5280 also sort of protested or participated in that and spoke out, and the mayor caught some criticism when he was trying to address the crowd. This is an issue that is front of mind with so many people, you can't ignore it. And you can try to policy your way around it and through it, but at some point people are going to compel you to address it. So I'd like to see the city be more proactive and step out and say, okay, we hear you, we've got to deal with some of this and talk about some of this. I think the reorganization of the Sheriff's Department may help. I just hope at some point they get some community input to that process, because there is the belief that the city has become so insular, they're not listening to people. In terms of the DA's office, I mean, I like Mitch, but David's right. His record is perfect. He's never prosecuted anybody. But the distinction in this case is, you've got the city's coroner who has ruled this was a homicide. And so not every DA has to only prosecute cases they know they can win. Sometimes you bring a case because it's the right thing to do. You know that it's been deemed a homicide by the coroner. Yeah, I read Mitch's letter, and the coroner said can't conclusively state one thing or another, but sometimes a criminal prosecution is a search for the truth and justice. And at some point, there needs to be sort of a cleansing, and some of this needs to be brought in front of a jury of peers to let them hear the evidence, listen to some of this, and resolve what happened. When a 112-pound man who's got mental illness is killed in a jail, and the only people around him are 5 deputies and 2 nurses, something's wrong.
Right. I agree. It feels sometimes that there's too much of a concern for a perfect winning record with these cases rather than just should it go to trial.
Sure.
Mike, regarding the homeless program here, this is not the first time the city of Denver has attempted to do something positive for the homeless. What do you think is different about this plan, good or bad?
Well, I agree with David. I think it's a good step. I think the mayor deserves a lot of credit for pursuing this. It's innovative. It's something new that the city will pursue. I want to go back to something Penfield mentioned about the DA's case. One of the reasons we're having these debates, and there's so much pent-up demand to debate this right now, is police violence really never came up in our 2015 mayoral or city elections. I mean, you can say what you will about the council races, but the mayoral contest wasn't really even a contest. There was really no chance for that to come up. Hopefully with the DA's race coming up later this year, there will be a chance to fully debate this, and we're going to have an active Democratic primary for that seat, and hopefully that'll provide an avenue to really discuss the issue of police violence.
A bipartisan campaign was launched this week opposing Amendment 69, the proposed single-payer health insurance plan that will appear on this November's ballot. Republican State Treasurer Walker Stapleton and former Democratic Governor Bill Ritter came out against the initiative, citing that the 10% proposed payroll tax would burden citizens. We should note that the organization is called, the opposition organization is called Coloradans for Coloradans. So, David, apparently Coloradans Against Canadians was taken or something like that. It's a rather silly name, I think. Are you surprised by this bipartisan effort?
Not surprised that it's bipartisan because as they say, the economics of it are catastrophically bad. But to have such a prominent leader as former Governor Ritter, I think it's huge. That's a game changer. And there's going to be a lot of voters who say, I can't drill down to all these pros and cons and the budget items and things like that. But when I see a guy like Bill Ritter, who is no small government, put the government in the bathtub and drown it kind of guy, when he says this isn't going to work and it's actually going to be very harmful, I think that will and should convince a lot of swing voters. This was tried in Vermont and repealed after it failed there. And there have been similar things like that. The Tennessee 10 Care initiative in Tennessee, they tried that for a while. The state government, do you think the Department of Human Services is doing a good job on its fairly small, finite amount of stuff it's got to manage? How about like Child Protective Services? Is that working well? Every 6 weeks or so, you get an article in the papers about how completely messed up the state's computer systems are. You want to take that organization, which is already having a lot of problems managing what it is supposed to do, and in a fiscal sense, double what they're required to do. I don't think the government at this stage in its development has the competence to take over every single person's health care in the state of Colorado. And remember, this is a constricting system because they're only going to make it work by putting price caps on medical providers. And they would actually criminalize it if you go to a medical provider with your own money and pay that medical provider with your own money more than this price cap. So it'll be a great way to drive doctors out of Colorado and devastate the health of the people of Colorado.
Penn, so Kelly Brough, Bill Ritter, and Walker Stapleton all walk into a bar and agree. This must be a big deal, right?
Well, first I should say, after listening to David, I want to take 2 aspirin and go home and take a nap. I'm so depressed. But in many respects, he's right. But no, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. And it's interesting to see how this debate gets formed. The technical proposal itself it's doomed. It's just fatally flawed. It's a constitutional amendment, which is a non-starter, and it cost $1 bajillion, which Colorado voters are never going to go for. But if the proponents are smart, and I don't know any of them, and I think the reason this is on the ballot is it's a reflection and expression of citizen frustration with the whole medical services, insurance company, pharmaceutical company, healthcare delivery system. I think of the old movie Network where the guy screams out the window, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." I think that's part of what this proposal is. I think what you've got people saying is this has got to stop. You know, the Affordable Care Act was an effort, but premiums are going up, deductibles are rising, you know, the quality of care isn't that much better. Remember that young punk, I'm sorry, I say the word punk, the brat, who raised the prices of his drugs by 1,000% because he could? And then he ends up getting prosecuted or indicted or something for some criminal activities. People are angry about health care. And while this proposal may not pass, I think those who are opposed to it and sort of go front and center, they ought to be prepared for the conversation, which is going to say it's not just enough to say no, you're going to have to say what's the reasonable alternative to begin to solve this massive problem.
Mike, were you surprised to see such a big bipartisan group come together pretty early in the campaign? I mean, it's still January, and we're talking about a group coming together to fight something that's on the November ballot.
Absolutely not. Colorado and the nation have been through a lot of change when it comes to healthcare policy. In Colorado, we had the Senate Bill 208 Commission, all the way through the actual implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Regardless of the merits of this, it's a tough sell to scrap the system yet again and start over.
Right. Patty, if Bernie Sanders does well in Colorado, does this do well, or are they both doomed?
Well, you can always be surprised by Coloradans for Coloradans. So if Bernie, maybe they just want to stomp it before Bernie gets in, if that's going to happen. But when we are looking at this November ballot, it is so crazy. This is just the least of the contentious issues that are on there. We heard Jared Polis this week talking about oil and gas again. We've got those ballot measures. We've got the right to die measure that's going to come up. That's going to be an incredible one. So just get ready to spend a lot of time filling out your ballot. Whether or not you're voting for Bernie, you're going to be dealing with a lot of Colorado issues in come November.
CDOT will host 3 community meetings next week to discuss the North Denver I-70 plan. Unite North Metro Denver, a neighborhood group against the current proposal, supports a rerouting of the highway into Commerce City. However, we haven't seen much support of that from CDOT or state government. Penn, this is going to be a big, fat, hairy deal for the city of Denver. We're talking about the I-70 corridor in between what us natives would call the mousetrap all the way out to I-225. Is CDOT, when you see these community meetings, are their ears really open, or is it lip service?
Well, I think that's part of the issue the United North Denver neighbors have raised is, it's one thing to make a decision based on all of the information and listening to what people are saying, but their whole point is we can't get the governor, we can't get CDOT, we can't get the mayor, we can't get city council to even sit down in a room and talk with us about our concerns or our perspective. And in fact, we'll remember last year, I think it was September, October, city council approved a contract to finance part of the sewer system and wastewater and drainage system work for the project, and the project hasn't even been finalized and gotten its final US DOT certification and approval yet. So the neighborhood is saying this looks like a fait accompli, but what they're also saying is if you really want to redevelop the National Western, you need space. If you really want to benefit the neighborhoods, you need space. The most logical thing to do is simply reroute around Swansea, Elyria, and Globeville, take down the viaduct, and restore the original neighborhood grid. We've talked before about the political shenanigans that led to the original layout of I-70. That's history now, but I don't quite understand why and I think some people feel it's a charade of these public hearings when you know what the sentiment of many folks in the community is, but it looks like they're just being ignored. I'm going to attend the one in Denver. I'm just fascinated. And I attended some of the very, very early EIS to I-70 East meetings a few years ago. But it'll be interesting to see what the rationale is that's stated for the current plan to burrow underground and put a cover on a little part of I-70 and blow it open rather than move around the neighborhoods.
Mike, for the folks that live around that area, do you think those folks want to see more options, at least on the table? It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of proposals that here's what it's going to be. Do you like it now or do you like it later? It doesn't sound like there's a lot of options. Do you want to see more options?
I think so. I think that's a reasonable request. I think the residents there deserve that. One of the things I hope happens throughout this community process is obviously people show up at these community meetings, but also we have a broader discussion about other alternatives that people are already using. I live out on the east side in Stapleton, and I avoid I-70 now. I probably will avoid it even if it's improved. But because of this, and many people of the same line of thinking, MLK has become the thoroughfare of choice, and it's already pretty gridlocked if you try and commute in anytime after 7:30 in the morning. So here's hoping the city puts forward not only multiple plans, but also many alternative routes and pays attention to improving and widening those routes.
Patty, it's a state issue. I mean, we have CDOT because it's an interstate highway, but it's impacting a tremendous impact on the city of Denver. Should there be more voices from Denver at the table?
Well, we've certainly heard some of them. I mean, Dennis Gallagher, this was one of the last issues he really took on when he was in the office. And the council vote that Penn was referring to was actually right before the new council members took office in July. So it was basically a rubber stamp by the city on this project that by paying for this wastewater plan was saying we basically approve what's going to happen with this new route without letting any of the new council members vote on it. Debbie Ortega has asked for 30 more days from CDOT because technically we're in the middle of a 30-day period, and that's the end of the next week's hearings are going to be kind of the end of the public input. I haven't heard if she's gotten an extension of 30 days, but it's a big issue. The one thing that always nags at me is when they show these pretty pictures of what happens if I-70's gone, and we have to think about, does Commerce City want the highway going through? When you look at these beautiful pictures, you're going to reunite the neighborhoods. Oh, we see how neighborhoods are faring so well in Denver right now with the little old residents. Those houses are getting wiped off the map, and there's no reason to think it wouldn't happen here too when all of a sudden a whole new area is opened up for development.
I'm surprised all those pretty pictures don't have a little Starbucks and a TJ Friday sign on.
Oh, they do.
David, wrap it up for us.
One thing that ought to be part of the plan, and was maybe according to the Denver Post, is pay for additional lanes by making them, as we did on US 36 and also the I-70 eastbound, making them optional toll lanes. So when you're really in a rush and you got to get to daycare to pick up your kid and you don't have the option to use anything other than I-70, you can choose to pay the toll, and if you don't want to pay the toll, then you can stay in the regular lanes. So they're a self-financing expansion, and that's a great way. The people who use the highways should be the ones who pay for the highways, and that's a really, CDOT's done a solid job on both of those projects.
Well, let's get to our very favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week, and as always, Ms. Calhoun, please start us off.
Well, I don't usually go national on this, but it's so pervasive, I can't avoid it. After watching the debate last night, the fact that veterans are now being used as political pawns, first by Donald Trump, and some of them are objecting to that fundraiser. We also have the story breaking on the East Coast that the Wounded Warriors Project, which is the one that Fox is pushing so hard, pays a very small amount of the money they raise to actually helping the wounded warriors, and instead puts at least a third of the income they get into just advertising their own cause. So we've seen in so many ways veterans have been mistreated, and all you have to do is look to the Aurora Project, which we won't see finished for years yet.
Sadly, an epicenter of that same abuse. You're absolutely right. David.
I'd agree with Patty that there are a lot of better veterans charities than Wounded Warriors. The mayor has the problem of doing a bet with his counterpart in Charlotte, knowing that the Broncos may be a touchdown underdog. The solution is, say, if either city gets a catastrophic snowstorm that shuts the city down, I will shovel your sidewalk. And that means if in Denver that would be a 36-inch storm, in Charlotte it would just be 1 inch.
Wise bet indeed. Very well said. Ben?
I'm sort of tempted by Patty's a reference to the veterans, because I always wonder why the people who never served want to be the most patriotic on support of veterans. But my disgrace, I'm still disturbed by Mitch Morrissey determining not to prosecute when you've got a coroner who's ruled this was a homicide. There's a disconnect there that troubles me still.
Mike?
With Iowa just around the corner, I have to say, purveyors of conventional wisdom. Time and again, the Trump narrative has shown that armchair quarterbacks keep getting picked off by reality.
The toughest part of the show, say something nice about somebody. Patty?
It's kind of easy this week. Denver is growing, booming. We've seen a lot of our history disappear. Next week, Historic Places is having the big preservation conference in Denver. Let's remember the things we want to celebrate that still exist in the city. Let's protect the ones we still can and just remember our heritage.
David?
The Republican presidential debate last night, which in the absence of Trump was actually able to have some serious discussions on important issues like Syria. It's like when the obnoxious 7-year-old who's playing chopsticks on the piano all night finally goes upstairs and goes to sleep, and the grown-ups can have a conversation.
Out of all the different metaphors I've heard with Donald Trump, that's got to be one of my favorites. I like that one, David. Penn?
The spirit of community, because even though it seems trivial, the way this community unites around a good thing like celebrating the Broncos going to the Super Bowl, it kind of lifts you for a few weeks. And so I think we ought to commend ourselves for again showing collectively we can be successful and happy and prosperous.
You're absolutely right. And Mike?
I'd say institutions of Colorado journalism. Colorado's been known as an exporter of great beer, tech, and many other high-quality things. It's often overlooked that we export a lot of really awesome journalists. You can talk about Eli Stokols or Chris Freitz, but this week with the standoff in Oregon, hopefully wrapping up, you see 2 Colorado media alums, Conrad Wilson of KDNK in Carbondale, and Kirk Sigler, formerly of KUNC, and someone who sat at this table often who are doing yeoman's work covering this national story.
Great to see some former public media colleagues go out and do that. That's fantastic. Good. I definitely echo that. That is all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to tune in on Tuesday as the 3rd season of Street Level continues. This time we go to Colfax, the beloved street, Tuesday at 7 p.m. And as always, remember to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes and our web-exclusive segments on Twitter. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.